to kill the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, our plan is not anything like that. We're not gathered together for that purpose. But our purpose is to understand something about the nature of the difference between the politics of human beings and the policies of the Supreme Lord. So, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Hare Bol. Wow. It's a nice garland. Thank you. So, do we have a Bhagavad Gita?
We do, yeah.
That would be nice. Can I just check and see, everyone here is somewhat familiar, perhaps Chris, you're not so familiar with Bhagavad Gita, but thank you very much,
Okay.
Yes, that's perfect. This is a very interesting book, and it's also about a political drama in background, but of course the essence of what is discussed takes us way beyond the politics of ordinary human beings and takes us into the realm of the whole purpose of life, the policies of the Supreme Person, what he has in mind for us, and what really politics is supposed to be about, we learn from Bhagavad Gita, is the welfare of all human beings, and not only human beings, but of all creatures. So we learn in Bhagavad Gita this very ancient conversation. Of course, this is a modern day printing, but the very interesting point is that the text hasn't changed in 5,000 years, which is quite a record. So the conversation, the sung conversation, because Sanskrit is a language which is sung, and it's the ancient language on which all the languages of the world, linguists advise us, are based. And it's a beautiful language, and so Gita means song. So Bhagavan refers to the Supreme Person. So in the West, this is often known as the Song of God. So it's a very powerful literature, because it's not, as my spiritual master put it, Srila Prabhupada, you can see here on the left-hand side, Prabhupada dancing with the devotees in London at Bhaktivedanta Manor, very nice place. We were donated kindly by George Harrison. And that was the installation ceremony of Radha and Krishna back in 1973 in Janmashtami. And Prabhupada, he taught us this principle that what is the use of following the policies of a dying man, when actually we're meant to understand the policies of the Supreme Lord, what he has in mind for us. So people often try to come to terms with what is the goal of life, what is the business of life, for what purpose we're here, why is the universe here. When I was a teenager, people used to ask me, do I think there's life on other planets? And the only answer, the best answer I could give, well, why else do you suppose they're there in the sky? Just like we have experience that everywhere you look, science discovers there are living entities everywhere. There are living entities in the ground, there are living entities in the air, there are living entities in the water, and there are some species like us who actually live on the earth surface. But the fact of the matter is they're all meant for experiencing different varieties of existence in the material world. But what we learn from Bhagavad Gita is that the living entity, who's actually different from the temporary body in which he inhabits, is eternally related to the Supreme Person. So this book is actually quite a short book. It's only 700 verses, and it comes as the essence of a very, very long book called the Mahabharata. It's called the Mahabharata because Bharat was the name of a great emperor of the earth, and so the earth planet at one point became known by the name of the great emperor, Maharaj Bharat, and it became known as Bharatvarsh. So the principle being that the emperor, he is meant for giving knowledge, giving education, taking care of the welfare of all the people in his jurisdiction. And we learn from Bhagavad Gita that that was the principle by which real culture, which we call Vedic culture, was propagated in the world. So the Mahabharata is a great history. It's the history not just of one tiny nation or one small part. It's a history not only of the earth, which was known as Bharatvarsh, the island in space known as Bharatvarsh, but also relating to various histories which are unknown to modern man, histories relating to other spheres of existence in the universe. And they give us a very nice picture of how this universe is actually structured, what is going on in the universe, what is the very purpose of the universe itself, where it has come from, why it is designed this way, how it's actually operating, and what is our role within this extraordinarily large operation we call the cosmic manifestation. So there are a lot of points there. We could discuss any one of them in quite depth. But before I begin, in all seriousness, does anybody have any questions they feel they'd like to ask about the topics that we're going to discuss, or that we have discussed so far? If you have some questions, that's also nice. Then I have an idea about where we're going. Yes.
I sort of, obviously having read the Bhagavad Gita, one question that I think kind of relates to what you were saying, hopefully, was I'm sort of interested in and thinking about the relationship between like relative truth, so to speak, and the absolute truth. So I know the Bhagavad, obviously Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita, and he's talking absolute knowledge, it's absolute truth.
Yes.
But he also describes relative things as well, temporary things.
Yes, Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita topics which are of interest to modern science. Krishna describes the nature of matter and the nature of antimatter, which is something which people struggle to get to terms with, because in modern science they're trying to test out anti-material existence with material substances, which makes it very difficult. But actually, Krishna debunks a lot of these theories in this wonderful book, Bhagavad Gita. And he begins his explanation in chapter 2, after the whole scene is set, by discussing what is that anti-material principle, and the nature of the material world being the world of the relative, and the anti-material world being the world of the absolute. So therefore Krishna begins by explaining what's the difference between matter and antimatter, what's the difference between the relative and the absolute. So when we say relative, we mean to try to understand this with our material minds. We need to understand that the relative world means, well, in one sense, we've all got relatives. If we didn't have relatives, then we couldn't exist. There must be our parents, there must be the grandparents, like that. There has to be some source. We talk about something being relatively true, like, for example, it's relatively true that I'm sitting here in this chair. But that's not absolutely true, because it's not true in all three phases of time. I wasn't always sitting on this chair. I'm only sitting on this chair now, and I won't always be sitting on this chair. But when we talk about the relative world, we talk about its truth in not all three phases of time: the past, the present, and the future. But when we talk about the absolute truth, we talk about that which is true in all three phases of time. So when it's declared, for example, in Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is absolute truth. It's not that he ever became God. It's not that at one point he's not going to be God. And it's not that he's not God now. Krishna, God, is actually a kind of relative term in itself. Because when we talk about God, we talk about someone who's supreme, and supreme means there must be someone who is subordinate. Otherwise there's no meaning even to the word supreme. Just like if we talk about heat, there must be some opposite, there must be some cold. Yes? If there is some darkness, there must be some light. So this is the relative world. So thinking of Krishna as being God is in some ways a relative discussion. But when we talk about the absolute truth, what we learn from the ancient Vedas, that Veda means knowledge, and the Vedas explain that the absolute truth is a superior concept to God, because the absolute truth is understood as to be that thing which science is trying to discover but refuses to ascribe a personality behind, which is the absolute source of everything that exists. Modern science is hell-bent, literally, on trying to convince us that everything has come from some chance combination of chemicals, some big bang, some whatever it was that exploded, and there was no person behind it. And this is refuted directly, even in this 5,000-year-old text of Bhagavad Gita, because Krishna uses a very important Sanskrit word. He says aham, which means I. Aham sarvasya prabhava, matas sarvam pravartate. Krishna explains that he is the source of both the relative worlds and the absolute world, of both the material worlds and the spiritual worlds. He explains, he says, matas sarvam pravartate, that everything emanates from me. So this point that this God particle, as the scientists playfully refer to it, as being the cause of everything, which they wanted to try and discover and control by their Hadron Collider and spend billions of your money on, then actually that God particle is revealing himself in the pages of Bhagavad Gita. He's explaining who he is. He's explaining not only who he is, but more importantly, to start with, he's explaining who we are and what this world is, what the relative and the absolute world are, what the material world and the spiritual world are. So when we talk about relative and absolute, let's think in terms of this body. Let's take a classic existential statement. I think, therefore I am. Yes? So if I think, therefore I am, yes, that's a good place to exist. But if I'm thinking I'm the body, then how long am I going to exist? And did I always exist? But if I understand that in the absolute sense, I have always existed, as do every one of us have always existed. And as Krishna points out in the Bhagavad Gita, every one of us will always continue to exist, because the living entity who is wrapped up or clothed in this body is actually permanent. Actually, the scientists, they want to find the God particle, but they can't even find the sample of God particle, which is the soul itself, you and I, all of us individual living beings. And I hope I'm not getting too technical here. Please pull me up if I'm getting too wacky or way out. But I'm just trying to put it in a different way of looking at it, that what actually makes the living body alive is the presence of the soul. And without the presence of the soul, there's the body lying on the floor. It's not going anywhere, except it's going to become, what, ashes or the stool of worms. That's the nature of this body. Is it not a fact? Everyone can agree, this principle? So what is it that's making that lump of matter into something alive and kicking, and that will protest when you kick it? But a dead body, no, it's not going to protest when you kick it because there's no one there to complain anymore. So understanding this simple principle is the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna explains that the soul is the permanent person, and the soul is the body is the temporary dress covering this permanent person. And just like we take on different sets of clothes, I'm sure that the clothes we're wearing now aren't the clothes we were wearing yesterday or the day before, or 10 years ago. We've changed our clothes many, many times in this life. And similarly, take a look in the mirror and see how much your body has changed over the years. Take a look at the family album and see all the changes that have taken place. And you can see pretty clearly, well, it's not quite the same body, is it? It's kind of different. And we can all appreciate the scientific principle because we've learned from modern day science that our bodies are made of cells, and we've also learned from modern day science that these cells, these living Lego blocks that make up the body, are also limited in their lifespan. They have a 7-year lifespan. So what happened to the body that was made up of cells 7 years ago is finished. It's gone forever, never to come back, which may be a good thing, depending on your perspective. But the principle is that the body is continually being replaced. Just like a set of clothes, we change our clothes throughout our life. Similarly, we change our bodies throughout our lives. But there's one thing that stays the same, that's you and me. We stay the same person, but yet our view of the world changes according to our experiences and our association that we keep. And the physical body is continually changing. So this is matter. This is the relative world, where you are only you, but you're not always going to look like you. You're going to look like something different in a little while. Is it true? Are our bodies always going to look like this? Think 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, they're going to look something completely different. Even if they exist, they're going to be transformed, because the nature of matter, or the relative world, is that everything is continuously being transformed. Just like you see a young baby. A young baby, it's the same ingredients, just it's got new packaging, and it looks very attractive with the new packaging, but it's exactly the same ingredients. But when the packaging gets a bit old and tired and worn out, it looks something different. But it's the same basic matter, but it's being transformed. But the difference between the relative material form and the absolute spiritual form is that it doesn't get transformed. It permanently exists without change. So just to get this idea, this is where Krishna begins in Bhagavad Gita. This is the basic understanding. In other words, in a nutshell, what are we talking about? That the living entity, you and I, we're not the body, but we're eternal spirit souls. Matter means temporary form. Antimatter, spirit, means permanent form, unchanging form. So you've got matter and antimatter, relative and absolute. So in order to understand antimatter, it's no good going to someone who only can teach us about matter. Someone who's versed in the science of antimatter or the soul can teach us about that science, or the spiritual science. Let's change the terminology now and call it spiritual science. And this is what is being discussed in Bhagavad Gita in plain view. And of course, when Krishna starts to address Arjuna, he first of all clears the decks of all the misunderstandings by explaining to Arjuna that actually for the soul there is never birth nor death. He doesn't come into being. He doesn't cease to exist. He's permanent. He's not changed. He's not slain when the body is slain. And this is essential understanding, because without understanding these principles, then the rest of Bhagavad Gita simply won't make any real sense. So this is where it starts. So from there, Krishna starts explaining some other really important hot topics. Like, now we've come into the world, what are we supposed to do? And now I'm understanding that I'm different from the body, what am I supposed to do? So Krishna, he starts addressing Arjuna, not as you the body, but as you the spirit soul. And he says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So he's already explained the difference between the matter and the spirit, and now he's addressing Arjuna as not just his friend, but the person, the eternal person inside the body. And Bhagavad Gita continues with that understanding in mind. So we could look at any one of these verses of Bhagavad Gita and get enormous depth of understanding. And as I said, there are only 700 verses in Bhagavad Gita. It's part of the great Mahabharata, which is 100,000 verses. So we don't have to go there. We can go straight to the essence, which is a very, very powerful transcendental literature. Because when we talk about transcendental, what do we mean when we say transcendental? What's the, again, we're looking in relative terms. What's the opposite of transcendental? It means the mundane. So the mundane world means the world of birth and death, and old age and disease. But the transcendental world means where these things simply don't exist. Where the soul is permanent, the persons are all living permanently in their natural environment instead of a hostile environment where our bodies continuously get old and diseased and die and then have to take birth again. So one of the things Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita is that here we are as eternal spirit souls. And why are we eternal spirit souls? Because we're little particles of the supreme eternal soul. That's why we're eternal. Kind of important to understand. What am I doing in this material world, in this hostile environment, where although I don't like to die, I don't like to get old, I don't like to get diseased, I don't like to experience the trauma of 9 months inside my mother's womb, and then out we go, oh no, here we go again, some light at the end of the tunnel, and that's it, another birth. So why are we experiencing all this? So everything is very nicely explained in Bhagavad Gita, that this living entity, he doesn't actually belong in this hostile environment. He actually belongs back in the absolute realm, in the realm of the absolute truth. And the absolute truth, as I almost concluded, was that from which everything emanates. So this is the difference. The absolute means that from which everything has come, and the relative means all the bits and bobs that go on after it's created. That's the relative world. I do something that causes something else to happen, and that causes something else to happen, and everybody's interacting with different cause and effects in the material world. Which brings us to the next point of karma, which is that cause and effect is a law. There is some cause, there must be some effect. And the law of karma means that law of cause and effect. Now, modern science is trying to understand the original cause, but they have to admit that yes, everything must have a cause. They can't just pretend that the material world always existed. But yet they can't answer the point, well, where did it come from? and they come up with a fanciful theory like everything just existed, and somehow or other it exploded and everything else came into being. But they don't explain where it all came from. Is it true? They say some big bang. So we were discussing the other day about terrorism, and how terrorism has very nicely proved the point that this idea of a big bang is quite foolish, for three very good reasons. Yes? One is, whenever you've got a big bang, like we see terrorists setting off all over the place, does it create something beautiful and wonderful and lovely and nicely organized and working nicely? Simply no. It creates something terrible. It creates a big mess. Otherwise, why do people get so upset when a terrorist sets off a big bomb? Yes? So the first thing is we can understand that a big bang will create a mess, not something wonderfully ordered and structured, like this cosmic manifestation, which is so arranged that we've been able to live our lives with all the necessities of life. We've been able to continue breathing all our lives. We've been able to continue getting our food and our water, the food which the machinery works so that the food just comes out of the ground and the water just falls out of the sky. It's an amazing machine. And it just works, and we don't even realize it's a machine most of the time. But the point is that there's a law of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect means that whenever you've got a big bang, not only it doesn't create something wonderful, like the material world, but we can also very clearly understand that, and this is where the governments work very hard to try to find out who was responsible, who set off that big bang. Do they ever say, oh, well, the Big Bang set off the universe, that just happened by chance. But this Big Bang, no, somebody must have done it. Yes? So it's a bit of a joke, really. And not only that, but somebody also, they know perfectly well, and they try to go through all the machinations to figure it out, somebody put the explosive materials there. Yes? Somebody must have put the explosive materials there. But modern science is trying to say, well, nobody put the explosive materials there. So is it very reasonable? No. So Bhagavad Gita explains us so that we get very reasonable and clear, crystal clear understanding that some person must have put those explosive materials there, and some person must have set off that program in motion, and that it was also a very big brain, not a no brain, that created something wonderful that can just sustain itself and continually work and operate, even in spite of the human species, which currently seems hell-bent on destroying the machinery. So there are a lot of not only unanswered questions, but highly unreasonable propositions which are put forward for our consideration, and not only put forward for our consideration, but are promoted and practically proselytized that everything has come from nothing, and that somehow or other there is no source, there is no brain, there is no intelligence behind the creation, and yet they want to give themselves very big Nobel Prizes for having intelligently discovered so many things, some tiny little aspect about how the material creation works. But they don't want to give any credit to the person who's designed all those things. They want to give themselves credit for somehow understanding how one tiny little part of the laws that govern this material nature work, but they don't want to give any credit to the lawmaker. And if there's no lawmaker, if laws just happen by themselves, why do you need to pay government ministers to run a government? If you don't need any persons to make the laws if they all happen by chance? So who has made these laws of nature? So this is a very important part of the discussion. But then another part of the discussion is understanding one of the very critical laws that affects all of our lives. And that is the law of karma. The law of cause and effect. Where does it all start and how does it affect us? What does it mean to be one of the smaller eternal living beings who are subject to the laws of karma? And is the supreme living being also subject to the laws of karma? Now, if the supreme living being is subject to the laws of karma, that means he's not the supreme living being, because it means the laws of karma would be more powerful than him. So as Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita, he says there is no work that affects me. And not only that not only we all experience we're under the control of material nature, but Krishna explains that actually I'm not under the control of material nature, just the opposite. The material nature is working under my direction. So this is someone interesting. This is someone interesting to get to know and try to understand. That who is this person? And of course it's very difficult to get to know personally the head of state unless he personally comes and explains himself to you. Just like even you may want to get to know who your father is. But how to understand even who your father is unless he personally explains to you, well, I'm like this and I'm like that and this is my life. So Bhagavad Gita is very interesting because here we learn about the original father of all creation, of all existence, explaining the truths about himself. So Veda means knowledge, and there are vast, vast Vedic literatures. But as Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita, that all the Vedas are ultimately meant for knowing him. This is the actual purpose of getting the human form of life, because it means a chance to understand what's really going on. And so Krishna very kindly, personally comes and explains himself. And he explains what the material world is all about, what we're doing here, how we're bound up in the material world by this very powerful law of karma, which is keeping us experiencing actions and reactions and more actions and more reactions and more reactions, and causing us to experience sometimes what we might call good reactions from the material nature, which we experience in terms of happiness, and bad reactions, which we experience in not so savory experiences in this material world. So these are all laws. This is the law of karma. And understanding the law of karma is a very critical part of understanding spiritual life. Because karma means for everything I do, there must be some reaction. I have to take the consequences of what I do. Is that a fact? Everyone has to take the consequences of what we do, sooner or later. The law means that sooner or later we take the consequences. So, therefore, we have to see that if I have to take the consequences of what I've done, is it going to change just because I leave this body? But the law of karma means wherever you go, it's going to find you. And whatever body you go into in the next life, supposing you're driving a car and you do some driving offense and you get caught by this yellow camera, there's lots of them around where I live. It means that even if you change your car or change your address, they're going to find you. Material nature means even if we change our body, we still have to take our karma coming on into the next life. We have to take the consequences of what we do. And because it's a law of karma, that means that you have to take another body in order to experience the consequences. So for someone who understands that I'm an eternal spiritual being and I'm here in the material world, and maybe I'd like to live in my natural environment, in the spiritual environment, in the absolute environment where birth, death, old age and disease are not an issue, then that means we have to put an end to being influenced by the law of karma. We have to become free from the karmic reactions that we've accrued. Are we all okay with that so far? Okay?
Yes, but we have to still experience all the karma we create, which can take a very long time.
Well, the thing is that actually no, because there is an alternative, which Krishna very people who like to read books, they often go to the end and see what happens in the end. And Krishna explains at the end of the book how to actually not experience all that karma. And he gives a very simple method. He builds up to it by gradually helping Arjuna, and actually he's not really helping Arjuna so much as helping us, because this is a conversation that's meant for us. And he's gradually explaining all the principles that real happiness is in relationship with the Supreme Person. And he's advising Arjuna throughout the text of Bhagavad Gita, throughout the conversation that's going on this battlefield for who's going to be the emperor of the world, before the battle starts, of course. A bit difficult to have this sort of conversation when everybody's throwing weapons at each other. So this is all taking place before the battle begins. And Arjuna, he has some legitimate concerns before the battle begins, that he doesn't want to be the cause of destroying the whole society by all the men in society who are at war killing each other, so that there's going to be so many ladies who don't have wives or husbands or fathers, and they're going to be unprotected, and there's going to be unwanted progeny. Hey, a bit like today, so many unmarried mothers, we see this going on in this world like everything. And Arjuna, he's sharp enough and intelligent enough and considerate enough to know that this is not just a war about how his elder brother, who's the rightful heir to the throne, on whose behalf he's going to fight, and just winning. But he's very considerate about what's going to happen as a result of fighting this war. He's considerate that he may also be involved in the karma for killing all these people. Even though it's his duty to fight as a member of the royal order, he's not going to bravely stay behind his desk and press a few buttons and send everyone else out to fight. He's actually out there on the front line himself, doing the business, leading the charge, not from behind. So he's concerned. What about my karma? What's going to happen to me if I'm responsible and I have to take the consequences for all these hundreds of millions of people being killed? What's going to be my reactions for that? I'm going to have to experience birth and death and be killed in so many future species of life. And who is there going to be left to enjoy with if we kill everyone? Where's the rest of the royal order going to be? How are you going to have fun with your friends if they're all dead? And he is also concerned that it's not the right thing to do. That these are, after all, his family members. On the opposing side are his teacher and his grandfather, who he has enormous respect for. And he doesn't feel it's right to be killing them. And so he's got a lot of issues about this war that's about to happen, because they're already assembled on the battlefield, ready to kill each other. That's what happens in war. So Krishna, he starts to speak and explains all the principles of life. He's starting explaining about the difference between the soul and the body, and he doesn't just come up with what some people may call a slightly fatuous argument by saying, well, don't worry about your grandfather and your teacher, because they're old now and they're going to be killed and they're going to get young bodies, so what's the problem? He does mention that to help Arjuna understand, but he goes on to explain so many other principles about how they're regressors, and you are duty bound as a protector of the people to not allow aggressors to flourish in the kingdom. You have to kill them. They can't be allowed to continue. And above all these arguments, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that his mission in coming to the earth at that time is threefold. His mission is, one, to protect those who are faithful to God, and to annihilate those who are unfaithful. So this is a huge unnecessary military might on the surface of the earth, which is simply creating a huge burden for the earth and for the human society. And therefore Krishna's program, his policy, is to get rid of this unnecessary burden on the earth. And just like in a garden, you protect the nice flowers and you uproot the weeds, is it not? Yes. Otherwise, what's going to happen to the nice flowers? The good flowers and crops are going to be strangled by the weeds. So when you're doing gardening, and Krishna's exercise in Bhagavad Gita and his appearance on the earth, as Mantra Chaitanya Prabhu knows, because he's a gardener, he knows that in a gardening exercise, you have to be pretty ruthless as far as the weeds are concerned. You can't say, oh, nice weeds, or I'll give you some other nice place to live. No, you've got to get out. So human society is like that. That there are peaceful, cooperative elements in the human society, and that society is not just meant to be a pretty place for people to live, and not just to be not disturbed by the unruly elements in society, but there's a reason for this human society being so much more developed than that of the animals, because the human beings have a much higher purpose to fulfill than those in the other species of life. And that purpose to fulfill, why they need a peaceful life to be able to execute their human life successfully, is to understand that success of the human life means to re-establish the relationship between the soul and the individual small souls, you and I, and the Supreme Soul. And to do that, if everybody's busy fighting and killing each other, it's a bit hard to concentrate on your spiritual life. So therefore, Krishna's purpose is to do three things: protect the devotees, annihilate the miscreants, and to re-establish Dharma, or the principles of sane human life, or if you like, the principles of religion, where people can progressively march towards their understanding, and as is explained in the beginning of chapter 9, their complete successful realization of their relationship with the Supreme Person. So all these things are being very nicely and scientifically discussed in Bhagavad Gita. And we were talking about, Hare Krishna, what happens at the end of Bhagavad Gita, and your question was about how you have to keep living out all your karma and how do you get to the end of it. So this is a very important point. What Krishna is advising Arjuna to do throughout Bhagavad Gita is to learn about Krishna himself, and to learn how to see the Supreme Person everywhere, to learn how to be conscious of our relationship with the Supreme Person. And gradually the Bhagavad Gita develops this very clear understanding about that relationship with the Supreme Person. And whereas Bhagavad Gita begins with a discussion, a very interesting discussion using super high-tech equipment. It's called TV without a television. It's spiritual television, because as we see from the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, very advanced technology was being used, completely wireless-free, cameraman-free, television-free television, Sanjaya was able to envisage, by the mercy of his spiritual master, exactly what's going on the battlefield. What people are doing, what they're saying, what they're thinking, what's the whole scene. And that's how Bhagavad Gita begins, by his master, Sanjaya. He's the secretary of Dhritarashtra, the father of the unruly cousins who have tried to usurp the whole kingdom. And he's asking Sanjaya, because his name is Dhritarashtra, I don't want to confuse everyone with too many names, but Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjaya because he himself is blind. Dhritarashtra is blind and therefore is neither fit to rule the kingdom, nor is he very wise about, unfortunately, his own sons who've got various rascal policies about trying to take the kingdom for themselves. And he's asking, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do, being assembled at the holy place of pilgrimage of Kurukshetra, which is a very famous actual place of pilgrimage where the battle was taking place in India. And at the beginning of the battle, Arjuna, actually this is how Bhagavad Gita starts, why the conversation takes place, because Arjuna, he's so thoughtful and saintly a person, although he's a member of the royal order, he's a saintly person, and therefore he's considerate about what goes on. And when he sees the devastating effects that are going to happen as a result of this rather extraordinary war, in which about 640 million people are going to be killed, he decides this is not good. And being a gentle soul at heart, he decides, I'm not going to fight. And he explains to Krishna that my hair is standing on end, Krishna. My skin is burning. And I can see only disaster of what's going to happen as a result of this war. And he sits down on his chariot and drops his bow, and he says, Krishna, Govinda, I'm not going to fight. And that, of course, is when Krishna actually starts to speak Bhagavad Gita and explain the transcendental science. But now, again, skipping to the end, we'll see that Sanjaya, who's also heard the conversation and relayed this conversation to Dhritarashtra, what is his experience? I'm coming to your point in a roundabout way, okay? So Arjuna, his experience, or Sanjaya, his experience of having heard the conversation, as he says that having heard this conversation between these two great souls, Krishna and Arjuna, now my hair is standing on end, and I'm experiencing a thrill at every moment as I recall this incredible conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And he said, not only that, but I rejoice again and again, remembering the beautiful form of Lord Krishna and his wonderful instructions. So this is someone who's actually heard Bhagavad Gita. He's experiencing a thrill at every moment. Now, is there anyone here who'd like to experience that?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few takers. Okay. Actually, this is how the whole material world is going on. We'd all like to experience a thrill at every moment, but anyway, here we are. So it's a bit tough, really. But the whole point of hearing Bhagavad Gita is so that we can come to this level of understanding. So what happens just before this conclusion, this all-important question that Peter has very kindly asked? What about that you have to live all your karma? And Krishna points out, as he's teaching Arjuna to become conscious of Krishna and conscious of the relationship that we have at every moment with the Supreme Person, and teaching Arjuna to always think about this Supreme Person, Krishna, and to always offer our respect and our obeisances to him, and to worship him, and to surrender to him. He says, actually, do four things, Arjuna. This is a nice fourfold principle. He says, Manmana bhava madbhakta madhyaji mam namaskuru. He says, you do these four things, Arjuna, and this will be the result, that you will come to me without fail, back to your original home, the absolute realm, where birth, death, and old age and disease will never happen again, and you'll be able to live eternally, permanently, blissfully with me. So what are these 4 things that Krishna is telling Arjuna? He's saying, Manmana, engage your mind, not in letting it run riot and think of all kinds of nonsense, but Krishna says, engage your mind in always thinking of me. He says, Manmana bhava madbhakta, you become my devotee. Very simple. Madhyaji, you worship me. And mam namaskaru, you offer your obeisances, your homage to me. And he says, in this way, surely you will come to me without fail. He says, I promise you this, because you are my very dear friend. And then in conclusion to all this, just to sum it up in one simple verse, Krishna says, and here's your point. Sorry to go about it in a long way. But Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Krishna says, all right, Arjuna, here it is. I'm going to lay it on the line, nice and simple. You've developed so many different dharmas, so many different ideas and understandings and rules about how to live peacefully and successfully in this world. Now, Arjuna, just give it up and surrender to me. Very simple. And what is the result? Krishna says, aham tvam sarva papebhyo. Again, this word aham. Krishna is saying, I, tvam, all your sarva papebhyo, all your karma, all your sinful reactions. Krishna says, I will protect you from all these. Because don't forget, Krishna is explaining the material nature is working under his direction. So it's just like if you're in a prison, the head of state can give you full pardon. Come on out. No more having to experience all the reactions to your karma. And he says, I will protect you from all your sinful reactions. Moksha Shami, I'll protect you. Ma Shuchaha, don't be afraid. That's what's at the end of the book. That's the bottom line. So it's a very interesting and useful book to read, because there's a whole lot in between which is seriously worthy of our reading and understanding, because that completes the whole picture. And it's difficult in a short session to cover all these points, but I've tried to get to some of the basics. So is that all right with everyone so far? Okay, so let's open the floor now and see if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. Yes?
You said about being relieved from karma through bhakti, following the principles or following Krishna. So you had a break in that. I mean, is it completely cessated, or is it like taking the needle off of a record? If you know what I mean. Like if I went back into getting intoxicated and living my old lifestyle, then would the karma resume from the previous time, or am I? Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, it's just like this fan here. If you unplug the electricity, then the fan slows down and gradually comes to a stop. But if you plug it back in again, then you've got the same effect. But Krishna's advice is, don't surrender to me just to get rid of your karma. Surrender to me and develop your love for me. And as Krishna points out, many, many persons in the past all became purified by transcendental knowledge of me, and thus they all attain transcendental love for me. So it's a question of what we love. If we love material activities, well, it's pretty hard to love them because the reactions aren't always so sweet. If we love those things, we'll carry on doing them. But as we develop our love for Krishna, then gradually we can be weaned off material so-called enjoyment or suffering, to put it in a nutshell, and develop our attraction for the Supreme Person. Because the other thing that makes us take birth again and again, and what makes us take birth in a particular species of life, is what we've developed our love for. Krishna points this out. He explains manmana, again the mind, the man. Manmana. No, he's explaining, what is that verse? Yam yam vapi smaran bhava. Smaran means remember. So generally we all remember to try to enjoy the material world. Is it a problem? We always think like that. The problem is learning not to think like that. So Krishna is saying whatever state of being one remembers when he leaves this body, that state he attains in his next life without fail. That's the secret of what sort of body we're going to get in our next life. Another very important point. So, therefore, Krishna is making the point that if we develop our love for him and become absorbed in him, then we'll go to him. But as far as the karma is concerned, Krishna is explaining ye yata mam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajamyaham. That, okay, I've surrendered this much to Krishna. I've still got a whole bit more to surrender, right? So Krishna points out, each as they surrender to me, I reward them accordingly. You take one step towards Krishna, Krishna takes 10 steps towards you. But Krishna doesn't take away our independence. If we choose to stay in the material world, even after having learned so much about it, that's our choice. But this comes with a government health warning. And the government health warning is once you've started to find out about Krishna, it's going to be very difficult to forget. So this is very nice, actually. This is a great advantage. And just like we may pursue some path in the material world, and whatever we've done, when you leave your body, that's it, that's the end of that. It's all finished, no matter how much a big empire you've developed, no matter if you've got Trump Towers or whatever it may be, it's all finished at the time of death. But Krishna makes the point that a little progress on this path saves one from the most dangerous type of fear, which is falling down into a lower species of life. But Krishna also points out that svalpamapyasya dharmasya, that a little progress on this path, whatever progress you make, is never lost. Even you change your body. So if you cease your spiritual activities, it's not all over. You may have put a temporary hold on it and carry on with material life. But hey, that's your choice. But the point that Krishna is giving in Bhagavad Gita is explaining that how we can actually go forward, and that our destination in life is according to where our association lies. Karanam gunasangasya sadasaryoni janmasu. According to our association with the material nature, we get this idea to enjoy, or something comes up and that's a nice idea to enjoy. So going this way and that way. But therefore, sadhu sangha, that association with sadhu, saintly person, is very vital, because that helps us focus our attention on going forwards and not going backwards. So this is a very important point. So it's not lost, because as Krishna points out, one who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. And Arjuna asks him, in other words, the very same question. He says, what happens to someone who practices spiritual life or yoga practice? Yoga means to link with the Supreme Lord, and gives it up. Is he finished? Because he's given up his material life, and now he's stopped his spiritual life, or he hasn't completed in this life. And Krishna says, no. Someone who does good is never overcome by evil. And he goes into a little bit more detail. He says that person can attain the higher planets and enjoy there for many thousands of years, where the pious people dwell. But then again, when the good karma, the results of his pious activities have been exhausted, a bit like you go on holiday, and when your money runs out, you've got to come back down again. So similarly, when that pious activity, when the bank account of pious credits is exhausted, one comes back down again and takes birth. If one's performed yoga practice, he takes birth in a wealthy or mercantile or aristocratic family, And again, by virtue of the divine nature, he again becomes attracted to the yogic principles and continues from where he left off. Or, as Krishna points out, after long practice of yoga, spiritual life, then someone gets to take birth instead in a family of transcendentalists, those who are actually seriously searching for spiritual realization. But Krishna points out that that's a very rare thing in this world, that you get to take birth in a family of transcendentalists. So there's no loss, but everything to gain. And it sort of gets summed up to me when I think of that nice story about the chap who goes to the dentist. You know? But what happens, you can stop and you can do it, and start and stop and start. The chap goes to the dentist and the dentist tells him, I'm going to have to take your tooth out and it's going to cost you £500. So the chap's a bit horrified. What? £500? But it's only going to take you a few moments. He said, well, I could do it slowly if you like. So the same principle is there. We can do our spiritual life slowly, or we can get on with it and do the business. Is that all right? Good thing to get over and done with. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Some other question is there?
One that often comes up from one that I like getting many different arguments to discuss. Why the hell did we come here in the first place?
Well, this thing is there. Why are the homeless people on the street? Why have they left home? Ask them. They may have different reasons, but actually, when we have, as we've understood, a very secure home and a very nice home, we can understand that in that absolute world, we're not bewildered by the effects of material nature. Therefore, to make the decision to come to the material world must have been a very conscious decision. But understanding the mentality of living in the pure spiritual world where there's no birth and death is quite difficult from the position of where we are in the world of birth and death. So trying to understand that mentality and the mindset that we've gone through to choose to come here, we can understand it must have been a conscious decision. But hey, children are independent. Children can leave home if they want to. But here's the very interesting thing. When children leave home, then they sometimes forget all about their parents. Yes? But the parents, they don't forget about the children. And Krishna, he exemplifies that to the first class degree, because even though Krishna provides a place for us to leave and come to, the whole material world where we can forget all about him, and he even provides a nice padded playpen where we have a material body that no matter what you do to the body, you can't actually hurt the soul. Krishna provides that, and still he's so kind that he personally accompanies the living being, the spirit soul, as the super soul within the heart of that living body, to make sure he has everything he needs, that his desires are fulfilled according to what he deserves, his karma, and to ultimately give him the opportunity to return home, back to him, and revive that relationship. Just like when children have left home for a long period of time, but when they come back in contact with their parents, immediately the relationship is revived. So the thing is, trying to understand what was going through our minds to make us make that choice is very difficult. But what we can do something very tangibly about is the process of reviving our Krishna consciousness so we can go home. A bit like if someone shot you with an arrow. So if someone shot you with an arrow, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there trying to contemplate, how did I get this arrow? Or are you going to do something about trying to get the arrow out? So one has to think practically about these things and understand that it is very difficult to understand our mindset of what made us choose to come here. But definitely it was a choice, because Krishna, he hasn't created us all as robots. We're all individual parts of him, just as children are small particles of their parents, grown within the womb of a mother. And similarly, we're all grown within the womb of Mother Nature. Krishna has provided the world for us to play in, but he's also made it so there are all kinds of hints and impetuses along the way, so that when we get round to having a human body again, after 8,400,000 species, we might just wise up enough to think, what am I doing here? Maybe I don't feel I really belong here, and I should try to find out what is actually all this about and return home. That's the best answer I can give. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's a big topic, obviously.
Sorry?
It's a big topic, obviously.
It is a big topic, but the most important topic that Krishna is giving is how to return home.
The best answer you can get is it doesn't matter.
Yes.
I think I'm right in saying it says in the Gita that when you return to Krishna, you return to him eternally.
Yes.
Is that right? But
Yes.
we chose to leave him at some point.
Yes.
So
So once you get the experience, why will you want to come back and do it again? If you've already been killed, that's a good idea to come back and keep doing it again? Not really. So once we understand, and once we really understand, then when we really understand that Krishna is the source of everything and the source of unlimited happiness, and that real loving relationship for which we're hankering is with Krishna, then why would we want to come back here again? Is that all right?
Yeah, but why would we want to in the first place?
But we had a choice, just like children, they have a choice. We've used that choice. We've used our small independence to come to the material world. So, but once we've wised up, we don't need to do it again.
So we're created in the spiritual realm, and we choose to come to the material.
This is why we say back to God, back home, back to God.
Hare Krishna.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yes. Hare Krishna. Question.
Yeah. I just reflected on my to the world in.
Actually, we choose it by our consciousness. Because, as Krishna is pointing out, whatever mentality we've developed, then that determines the next birth. Let's take a practical example. Supposing I've developed the mentality that I want to sleep all day, then the body of a cat is very suitable. Or supposing I've developed the mentality that I don't care who I have sex with, then one can have the body of a hog, and you can have sex with your mother or your sister or whoever you want. And you can eat whatever you want to eat. You can eat people, you can eat any damn thing you like. No discrimination. So if someone has developed that mentality, then the body of a hog is very suitable. Or if you develop so much love for your cat or your dog, and you're thinking of them at the time of death, then that body awaits you. Krishna's point is that whatever you're thinking of, if you become dog conscious, you can get the body of a dog. But his point is that if we become God conscious, then we can come to him without fail.
I think, therefore I am.
Well,
Which is what you started with that, didn't you?
let's put it like this. When we talk about an eternal living being, we talk about the soul existing in all three phases of time. That means I exist now, I will always exist in the future, and I always have existed. So clearly there's something we've forgotten. So we've actually forgotten our previous existences, but Krishna is explaining that the soul doesn't come into being at any time. He's always existed. Now this is kind of hard for us to sometimes get our heads round when we're so used to seeing that everything has a beginning and an end. But that's the material world. But if we can understand that we have always existed, it becomes much easier to understand that that's because we're parts of God. who has also always existed. So first things first, that's why Krishna starts explaining in Bhagavad Gita about us. And there's the soul. So the point is that at some point we've chosen to leave our friendly environment and come to the hostile environment of the material world, with a view to being the center of enjoyment ourselves. Because the living beings are all meant to love God. But if we decide, no, I want to be the center, then you see the whole material world is full of all kinds of living beings who all consider themselves the center of existence. And so we come to a world where there's unlimited competition.
And Krishna is revealing us the journey to
Suffering. Because when we look at suffering in the material world, actually everyone is suffering. The body is, there are miseries we get from our own bodies and minds. Plenty of them. Yes, and this is the epitome of material happiness, that we want to stop the suffering. But what Krishna is explaining in Bhagavad Gita is that this isn't actual happiness. This is just trying to stop the suffering. Happiness is something completely much, much different and much, much better, that is ever increasing and is permanent and is forever. And is based on full knowledge of our actual existence. Whereas here, we try to get some knowledge to try to put an end to some sort of suffering or another. We want liberation from our suffering.
Yeah.
But Krishna is pointing out that the path of returning home back to him means that liberation is simply an insignificant byproduct of getting that actual happiness. So one doesn't even have to aspire for liberation. One really has to aspire for developing one's eternal, loving relationship with the Supreme Person, which is full of joy, full of knowledge, and permanent, eternal. So sometimes people may come to Krishna for 4 reasons. One is that they experience that they're in a miserable condition of life. And 2 is they may feel that they're in need of wealth. Or 3 is that they may be just inquisitive. And 4 is they're actually actively searching for absolute knowledge. But all 4 are perfectly good, valid reasons for trying to approach the Supreme Person. But the point is that those are the beginning stages. But as we progress from those beginning stages, those reasons fade into the background and become really less and less significant. Because the miseries automatically become reduced and insignificant. And the devotee gradually appreciates that this life is ananda kevala, that it is simply joyful, actually. And so when you're experiencing actual joy and happiness, you're not even bothered about the miseries because they don't figure anymore. But simply trying to end the miseries is what in the material world people mistake for happiness. And so they come up with all kinds of machinery and devices and novel ways of trying to distract themselves from the fact that the material world is a place of suffering. A temporary place full of suffering.
There's more. There's more.
Great.
Patience.
That's what we live for.
patience. We need. We want to end suffering now.
Yes.
But we can't. Oh, can we?
The point is
How
this.
quickly can we end suffering? It's like we are impatient humans.
Well, we have impatient human coverings over the soul.
Yeah.
But let me give a simple practical example. There's a nice story about how, I better finish pretty soon, haven't I? Yeah, okay. Just a nice story about how all the different parts of the body, there's a story in the ancient Vedas describing how all the different parts of the body, they got a bit fed up with always working just to satisfy the stomach. They thought all our work is just simply to feed the stomach. They're getting all the fun, so we should go on strike. And we're not going to work to please the stomach anymore. And so gradually all the parts of the body, they start becoming weak and losing all their energy and becoming really distressed. And so then the brain comes in and says, well, actually, there's a problem. It's not a matter of just trying to feed the stomach, but if you feed the stomach, you get the strength, you get the nourishment, you get all the benefit. And finally they got the idea and started giving the food again to the mouth, to the stomach, and then they all felt rejuvenated and able to experience life as it should be lived again. And similarly, we're also little parts of Krishna. And our role is that we're always active, but we have to learn the difference between activities that make us suffer and activities that actually rejuvenate our existence. The difference between material activities meant for our personal enjoyment and spiritual activities where we try to love and learn to revive our natural loving relationship with the Supreme Person. Just like the hand has a natural relationship with the whole, and it's naturally meant to put the food in the mouth. Very simple. And then automatically the hand feels perfectly nourished and full energy to do everything, whatever is required. So this is the process, not simply to put an end to a suffering, but the practical process of rejuvenating our permanent, joyful, fully knowledgeable spiritual existence, and automatically the suffering goes away. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Nice questions. Hare Krishna. Thank you all very much indeed. So I think at this point, what should we do? Should we rock?
Yes.
And roll?
And roll, please.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a kirtan. Let's do the appliance of science. We'll try chanting Hare Krishna and get a nice case. It's simply joyful process. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai. Krishna ki Jai.
And as you may have noticed, everyone, there are lots of wonderful books at the back of the room here, which Mantra Chaitanya will probably explain a little bit about later, which are really good and which explain everything step by step to make it very easy to understand. Hare Krishna. Now, can I ask everybody here, does everybody know a special dance step called the Swami?
Ooh.
We've got a very nice dance step which everybody can participate in if you like. It's very, very easy to do. I mean, you all know the words, I hope, of the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So there's a very nice song that's very good to sing. But Prabhupada, our teacher, he taught us a very nice dance step to do. Would you all like to try and learn a nice dance step?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's do it. It goes like this. If you put the right foot forward like this, and then back again, and the left foot forward like that, and then back again, and like this, and we chant the Hare Krishna mantra while we're doing the dance. And what you can do as well, which makes it even more fun if the ceiling isn't too low, you can actually raise our arms in the air and chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And if your arms get tired, one thing you can also do is there's a very nice clapping beat, which is like this. If you want to try this, it's not the slow hand clap where you're clapping everybody off the football field. It's like this. It's a 1, 2, 3. So it goes like this. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai!
Bhagavad Gita ki
Jai!
Canterbury ISKCON Yatra ki
Jai!
Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki
Jai!
Hare Bol! Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pariraja Astotava Sadashishima Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai!
Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki
Jai!
Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki
Jai!
Rem Sigaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki
Jai!
Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopina Shyamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan ki
Jai!
Shri Vrindavan Dham ki
Jai!
Shri Navadvip Mayapur Dham ki
Jai!
Gangamai ki
Jai!
Yamuna Mai ki
Jai!
Tulsi Devi ki
Jai!
Bhakti Devi ki
Jai!
Samaveta Bhaktavrinda ki
Jai!
Nitai Gaura Premanandi
Hare!
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Vishnu Krishna Prasad Vichare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauranga Chari Realisations